Welcome to Wildcards Abridged, voiced for you by the wonderful Angeleah Smith, defender of eunuchs, and roaster of hedgehogs, amongst other things. You may have noticed some of my Facebook complaining that I actually recorded this last night, but my microphone only recorded static. So I have since destroyed that microphone through various means. I may have set it on fire or thrown it against the wall or, whatever usual methods of destruction there are. And in the meantime, I commandeered a microphone from my uncle. And by commandeered, I don't even mean like stolen or borrowed. Like, he actually insisted I use this one when I bought one. He's like, why didn't you ask me? Like, I didn't think to ask you had a microphone. That's weird. Anyways. Tangents. So I decided in my, after listening to my recording of my overview of Wildcards, that I realized that I say a lot, and I decided that that's just going to be my version of food descriptions. So every time I say just imagine chicken, spaghetti, watermelon, goat nuts, whatever you're into. So, Wildcards is edited by George R. Martin, and he's also one of the contributing writers. The group is actually called the Wildcards Trust. And like I said before, I like to play games with myself to see which author I think wrote which character, because I'm a weirdo. So, our prologue is, it seems to be from a book, but some things to keep in mind is that these are journal descriptions and names, such as Einstein, stuff like that, are purely fictional. The usual shenanigans that any events, real or imagined, were purely by coincidence. And of course, this world is in parallel to our current universe. So people like Einstein and stuff like that did exist. Even George Bush Sr. was president in one of the most recent books that I read. So yeah, you'll see that, but that's that usual disclaimer. Even things that are quote-unquote wrote by those people, it is not actually wrote by those people per se. So anyways, prologue. From Wild Times, an Oral History of the Post-War Years, by Studs Terkel, Pantheon, 1979. And we first come across Herbert I. Cranston. I'm not sure what his actual role here is. The others seem to be army generals. Anyways, he first compares Tachyon's landing to the day the Earth stood still, and I've actually never seen that, so I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. But he thinks Tachyon's entrance was a lot better. One of the differences is that he landed in White Sands, not Washington. The spaceship, which Tachyon actually calls Baby, looks nothing like the usual pop culture spaceships. And this is where he meets Tachyon, and we get our first description of him as a cross between Three Musketeers and circus performers, which is really weird. He was short, maybe 5'3", 5'4", and to tell the truth, he looked more scared than us. He was wearing these green tights with the boots built right into them, and this orangey shirt with lace sissy ruffles at the wrist and collar, and some kind of silvery brocade vest. Real tight. His coat was a lemon yellow number, with a green cloak snapping around in the wind behind him and catching about his ankles. On top of his head, he had this wide-brimmed hat with a long red feather sticking out of it. Except when I got closer, I saw that it was a weird spiky quill. His hair covered his shoulders at first glance, so I thought he was a girl. It was a peculiar sort of hair, too, red and shiny, like thin copper wire. So for the longest time, I really thought Dr. Tachyon was a creation of George R. R. Martin, because of the red hair. He does have a bit of an obsession with that. Also, the Technesians are typically described with violet eyes, which, he has a thing for as well as the mind reading thing, but apparently it's a creation more of Melinda Snodgrass, and I kind of got into that before, where I was wondering about, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, because, Dr. Tachyon's, hand gets cut off in one of the books, and that's also a major theme of something that happened to Jaime Lannister, and that book was wrote, about six years before Game of Thrones was even wrote, and Storm of Swords, when that happened, that was later in the 2000s. But so yeah, as editor, I think he has a great influence over the writers, but it makes me wonder, like, what influence they have on him. But it also makes me wonder, like, he's been working with this group of people, the Wildcard Trust, for nearly over 20 years. I'm just like, why not tag team them in on writing The Winds of Winter? I mean, these are people that clearly know his writing style, especially Melinda Snodgrass. Like, she reminds me so much of him. She would be one of the perfect candidates. I'm just like, oh, why is that not being utilized? I mean, he's tagged some other people in for writing, like, the World of Song, the World of Ice and Fire, and stuff like that. It baffles me. I think that he has this team right there, right in front of him, that he's just not using. It's like having the Avengers, but, like, never calling them when, like, the world's getting ready to end. But anyways, especially Melinda Snodgrass, that's someone that I think he could utilize. But that's just me. Also, back to Dr. Tachyon, as you can see, he's described, most men tend to describe him as a sissy, and he's frequently called a sissy, a fag, all this other stuff, because he's a very emotional person. But at the same time, he's kind of a dick to women, and most women recognize it. It's kind of a paradox, because he's a heavy womanizer, and never really, it's kind of like a classic chauvinistic, you know, all this honor upholding type stuff, typical, you know, I want to sleep with you all, but I want to protect these other women, and, you know, that kind of thing, which, the most recent book I read, he really had a lot of that shattered, but it's just, the perspective of men, like, classifying, like, that's another thing with just equal rights to begin with. Not to get into, I know feminism is going to be a crazy thing that people get on me about. It's the internet, but whatever. That's the thing about feminism. It hurts men just as much as it does women, and these are one of those things. Just men not recognizing other men for individuality, like expecting them to be like a man's man, and you know, never crying, and not being emotional, and not dressing flashy, stuff like that, and that's something a lot of men, like, really heavily resent, and just, it's weird. He gets called a fag way too much. Anyways, so this is where he first meets Dr. Tachyon. And he mentions that also the ship looks nothing like the general culture of spaceships. He also says that he is the first human being to have ever met Dr. Tachyon. And then he tells them, welcome to America. Not welcome to Earth. Like, really? I'm someone in the United States myself, and I realize that we can feel like we're center stage a lot. And I totally recognize how resentful the rest of the world is. But even in this scenario, like, why wouldn't you say welcome to Earth? Like, he doesn't know about America and stuff like that. Yeah, he's a mind reader, but he gets a brief glimpse of someone. And this is where he first kind of gets freaked out, because Tachyon's like, Herb Cranston of Cape May, New Jersey. A rocket scientist. Excellent. I'm a scientist myself. And he's just baffled. And then he just waves his hand in there. He goes, I read your mind. That's unimportant. Time is short, Cranston. Their ship broke up. I thought he looked more like a little sick when he said that, and, hurting but scared too. And tired, very tired. Then he started talking about this globe. That was the globe with the wildcard virus, of course. Everyone knows that now. But back then, I didn't know what the hell he was going on about. It was lost, he said. He needed to get it back. And hope for all of our sakes, it was still intact. He wanted to talk to our top leaders. And he must have read the names in my mind, because he goes, Warner, Einstein, and this President Harry S. Truman of yours. And then he just climbs in the back of the Jeep and he's like, take me to your leaders. So that was a little bit of a weirdness. First, you have this alien crashing down, and then he's like all up reading your mind. Next up, we have Professor Lyle Crawford Kent. Who, in a certain sense, he kind of coined Dr. Tachyon's name. It was something very difficult to say. Any attempt to shorten it made him very sensitive. It's very similar to if you read The Dying of the Light, where Gus gets onto that other character for shortening his name, and it breaks down their whole culture thing. And actually, I have listened on Audible, the Wildcards, a few times, and read it, and I had not noticed this before, because I always assumed that Tachyon was like his family name, coming from the planet of Tachys. So I totally just got mind blown going over this. I was like, how the fuck did I miss that? Well, first, all the colleagues were mostly doctors, so, eventually they start saying doctor to everyone, and he starts getting included. And then, as he's trying to explain, how the spaceflight stuff works, he's more into, like, genetics and stuff like that, so, he couldn't explain it very well. So he basically was like, well, it's a theory of faster-than-light propulsion system. They had burned out his ship's interstellar drive. And the word for it was very long and stuff like that, just like his name. Well, this guy remembers a Greek word that refers to faster, to unknown particles travel faster than light. That is basically tachyon. And then people around the airbase and stuff would start saying that Tachyon fellow, and eventually it just kind of became Dr. Tachyon, which blew my mind, because I always thought it had to do with his planet being named Tachys, and that Tachyon was like a family name from there. So that was like, what? Anyways, he also mentioned that the reason why they didn't call him doctor, he was a prince from his world, but people in the U.S. are a little uncomfortable with words such as Your Majesty. So that wasn't something that we could really get into, which I kind of imagine that is kind of how that would go down if he in fact landed in the United States. If he had landed somewhere where there's still a monarchy going around, I mean, people may have felt very comfortable calling him a prince. So That's a little weird. So next we get into Colonel Edward Reed, U.S. Army Intelligence, retired. You want me to say it, right? Every damn reporter I've ever talked to wants me to say it. Alright, here it is. We made a mistake, and we paid for it too. Do you know that afterwards, they came within a hair of court-martialing all of us? The whole interrogation team. That's a fact. The hell of it is, I don't know how we could have expected to do things any differently than when we did. I was in charge of his entire interrogation. I ought to know. What did we really know about him? Nothing, except what he told us himself. The eggheads were treating him like baby Jesus, but military men have to be a little more cautious. If you want to understand, you have to put ourselves in our shoes. Remember how it was back then. His story was utterly preposterous, and he couldn't prove a single damn thing. Tachyon refused to let anyone onto his ship, but he would answer questions about it, but they were vague, since it wasn't his area of expertise. Now, part of that has to do with the connection with the spaceships from Takis is telepathic. There's actually it's kind of like the Stark's connection with like their dire wolves. There's a scene in this later book where all these ships get exploded, and it totally reminds you of in A New Hope when Obi-Wan feels Alderaan getting destroyed, and like that's what every Sith Lord on Takis felt when all those ships were blown up. It was very painful. They're very emotionally bonded with their ships. And part of that has to do with when you have an emotionally intelligent ship, they can kind of make more humanized type decisions and battle tactics, which is the big reason why they had that happen. But he didn't really know this, and I mean, he's not really going to explain. He has a special bond with the ship type thing. That's why you can't enter her. Not to mention, he was trying to get them to focus on finding the virus. Anyways, the main thing that they grasped was that there was an unknown particle that was traveling, or unknown virus that was out there somewhere in some kind of globe. And he was in charge of the interrogation, and hindsight is always 20/20. A very common cliche, but yeah. The story sounded really ridiculous, and there was little evidence. And what if this was a trick of the enemy of the United States? It could be something left over from the Nazis, or it could be the Russians. But what really gets me is, no one ever heard of this planet called Takis. Well, and he asks his, astronomer friends and stuff. Well, yeah, that's the name for their own planet that they gave themselves. Of course we wouldn't know planet Takis. We would have given it our own name had we discovered it. Most likely. I imagine Takis probably had a different name for our planet. I can't recall anything off the top of my head. But, that's another thing that cracks me up when I'm like, oh, it's not like your typical spaceship that you see in pop culture and stuff. Well, of course not. When it really happens, I mean, we probably would have something that defies our imagination type thing. The expectation to see what you see in pop culture from these people's point of view just kind of cracks me up, because really, your mind wasn't kind of open to it being different. And some people may suspect that pop culture is a reflection of what really is going on out there, with all those conspiracies. So maybe that's where that's coming from. But the whole planet name, yeah, that's the name that they have for their planet that we never knew about. So of course the astronomers would be like, yeah, we don't know what planet Takis, because we never fucking named it. Anyways, That's a little pet peeve of mine of this little military man, because that was just a stupid thing. To ask the astronomers, have you ever heard of tachyes? Anyways, the thing about this virus, the Psi Lords were about 12 or so powerful families, I believe, on tachyes that were constantly feuding with each other, much like the situation in Westeros. And the Psi Lords ruled over all these little tiny people, but the thing about them is they all had those telepathic powers, and they wanted to find a way to destroy the other families and just kind of, take over. So they developed this virus, and it could do all kinds of things, from their basic test. And it could either really enhance your telekinesis type powers, or it could really deform you or give you like unexpected powers. So because of that, they were a little reluctant to release the virus on tachyes, especially the part about giving the other side extra powers, because they only wanted to increase their psych abilities, and that was it. And everything else, okay, yeah, if they get turned into monsters, okay, fine, that works, but what about the chance of them getting additional powers that would give them advantage? Well, they came across planet Earth that humans were quite genetically similar to the people on tachyes, and they suspect maybe it was a lost Technesian colony or something like that. But his family gets this wonderful idea of let's test it on the humans on Earth, and he was quite opposed to his family doing this. And while he is asking, what does this germ do? It does everything. What it was supposed to do, according to Tachyon, was goose up these mind powers of theirs, maybe even give them new powers, involve them into gods almost, which would sure of hell give his kin the edge over the others. But it didn't always do that. Sometimes, yeah. Most often it killed the test subjects. He went on and on about how deadly the stuff was, and managed to give me the creeps. What were the symptoms, I asked. We knew about the germ weapons back in 46, just in case he was telling the truth. I wanted us to know what to look for. He couldn't tell me the symptoms. There were all kinds. Everybody had different symptoms, every single person. And we've never really heard of a germ that worked like that. Then Tachyon said that sometimes it turned people into freaks instead of killing them. What kind of freaks? All kinds. Nasty. And I asked him why his folks used this stuff on all the other families, because sometimes the virus did work. It remade its victims, gave them powers. What kind of powers? All kinds of powers, naturally. So that was basically the book's version of what I just narrated, because giving you the same information twice is so beneficial. Anyways, he didn't want them to use on Earth, and he felt that it was wrong. So he gets into this little space battle with his family, and his ship ends up falling, and he knows that the globe with the virus is somewhere, and then that's when his ship crashed, and that's when he landed on White Sands. So the military guy gets all the story recorded, and they tried to get everyone to take this stuff seriously. They were looking out for that globe. He was even kind of convinced that maybe it's possible, but the thing was, because of Tachyon's powers, he can also control people. So his superiors were kind of, when they read his reports, were thinking, oh, he's just being like Jedi mind tricked. So they thought maybe he was a good hypnotist, or maybe he was really good at reading body language, but there's no way he can actually read minds and do that stuff. So there was a lot of skepticism. So eventually Tachyon gets frustrated and he takes mental control over his guard. Well, they were kind of aware of his powers, so they told everyone around not to follow that guy's orders anymore. And his escape maneuver did at least get him to finally talk to Einstein. And he thought maybe Einstein could talk some sense into him, or maybe get a better sense of what was going on. I mean, he was the greatest brain. Maybe he would know something. The funny thing is, he doesn't really say what happened between Einstein and Tachyon. I assume either he didn't convince Einstein, or I don't know. But anyways, he's like, there are those who to this day still say the military is to blame for everything that happened, but it's not true. I'll maintain to my dying day that the steps we took were reasonable and prudent. The thing that really burns me is when they talk about how we did nothing to track down that damn globe with the wildcard spores. Maybe we made a mistake, yeah. But we weren't stupid. We were covering our asses. Every damn military installation in the country got a directive to be on the lookout for a crashed spaceship that looks something like a seashell with running lights. Is it my fucking fault that none of them took it seriously? Give me credit for one thing, at least. When all hell broke loose, I had Tachyon jetting back towards New York within 2 hours. I was in the seat behind him. The red-headed wimp cried half the fucking way across the country. Me? I prayed for Jet Boy.